In today's tutorial, I'm going to show you how to make one of my favorite bags I've ever designed, and that is the Sunny Sunday Tote. This tote bag is so much fun to make, and I've used flex foam as my interfacing, lining, batting, whatever you want to call it. So they stand up on their own. It is so much fun to sew with, and I can't wait to show you. So some features about this bag are that it's got two nice little shoulder straps on it. So when you put it on, it hangs really nicely under your arm because it's scooped out in the middle there. It has a flat bottom, so if you do use the flex foam, they will stand up on their own. It has two tones. You can mix and match however you want to do it. Like I've had lots of fun with fabric on these. It is quilted, so it's got nice texture on the outside. The inside is fully lined, and it does have a slip pocket on the inside. Now you can add some sort of closure if you want to. The pattern's not written with a closure, but you could easily add ties or a snap or a button closure to this if you wanted to. And you could use all sorts of fabrics for this. The one that we're going to be making in the tutorial today is just one color on the top, one color on the bottom, and then another color for the lining and the handles. But you could have lots of fun with this, like I did with my Christmas one and my fall one. And you could actually quilt together 2-inch strips of fabric to create a piece of fabric to cut your tops out of for this. So on this one, I used a bunch of Christmas fat quarters and some Christmas fabric for the lining that I stocked up on last year. I got so many compliments on this bag last year when I was wearing it at Christmas time. And then the first one I ever made was my fall bag, and so I used some fall fabrics where I sewed them together in strips, and then I picked a lining that went with it. And on these, I didn't even quilt the bottom piece. On the one we're doing today, I did quilt the flex foam to the fabric on the bottom pieces here. But they make a great little tote bag to go to the farmer's market. You could go to the library. I've used it when I've traveled to the airport to put my iPad in, all sorts of things. So it's a great size for all of that. I use these as my purse during the holiday season, and they work great for when you go shopping or the grocery store, whatever. You can use them for anything. So if you guys are excited and want to learn how to make one of these Sunny Sunday totes, stick around. All right, the supplies that you're going to need for your Sunny Sunday tote are a lot of them. Not really, but like there is quite a bit to this bag. This is one of my more advanced patterns. So you will need quite a few things, and you'll probably need some things that you have not used before in bag making. So I do suggest that you use clips. These are those little plastic quilting clips because you are sewing through the flex foam, and pins can make it get a little wonky or whatever. So clips work great with the flex foam. Of course, you'll need all of your usual things like scissors. You can use a rotary cutter and ruler to cut things out. You'll need your thread, your sewing machine, marking pens, all the usual stuff that you have. You'll also need to print out and put together your pattern. So all the pattern pieces are in the PDF pattern, and then you'll need to cut out your pieces. With your quilting cotton works probably the best. You could use like a lightweight canvas or whatever. Now you also do not have to do this on flex foam. You could do it on quilt batting, or my daughter likes to make them just with no batting and no quilting, so just the quilt cotton on the outside and the quilt cotton for the lining, and that works great too. But I'm going to show you how I wrote the pattern, which was for quilting it on flex foam, but feel free to do it any which way you want. So speaking of flex foam, this is a package of flex foam. It's by Pellon. It's FF78F1 flex foam. This one is the fusible one, but they do have one that's called Naked, which doesn't have any fusible stuff on either side, and that one is way less expensive, and that's usually the one I use. I just had this package in my stash, so I thought I'd show you what the package is. I buy it by the bolt because I do make quite a few of things, not just this bag, but quite a few things with flex foam. I love using it. You could also use Soft and Stable from By Annie. That works too. This is just a little more readily available. You can find this at Walmart. Now that Joann's is not here, you can find it on Amazon. It is a little more pricey on Amazon though. I have found that Walmart is like the least expensive place to get it, and some of the stores actually have it in the store, so on the bolt, and usually these little packages. So that is flex foam, and what it is it's a let's see, let me grab a piece that I haven't fused. What it is it's a really thin little foam. I want to say this is not even a 1/4 inch thick, and it almost kind of feels like headliner foam if you've ever used that, which would also work in this pattern if you have those, because I have some of that in my stash too. But this will give it some structure, so it'll stand up on its own. It's easy to quilt on. Now I have a semi-industrial machine, but my daughter has done this on her domestic machine before, so that works. So you're just going to cut out all of your pieces. This is the bottom piece, and you cut it on the fold, but because I have directional fabric, I cut 2 pieces and sewed them together. Hi, Mickey. This is my cat, Mickey. He doesn't come up here very often. Hop down. He loves to sit on everything, so I don't let him up here very often, but he's joining us today for this video because Goose, my boxer, is not up here. So you'll cut out your bottom piece on the fold, or if you have a directional print, cut 2 pieces together and sew them, 2 pieces out, sew them together so that your print, when it goes up the bottom of the bag, is facing the correct direction on both sides. You'll cut a piece of flex foam for that one. I haven't finished cutting that one out yet. You'll also need 2 of your top pieces. They look like this. I've already fused this to my flex foam on the back since I'm using fusible flex foam. If not, you can use a spray like, I don't have my other one up here. This is a quilt basting spray from Hobby Lobby, but you can also use the 501 spray. Spray that on there, stick it down. You can just pin it. That works too. But you'll need 2 top pieces. And then you'll need 2 pocket pieces and 2 of the handle pieces. You'll need to put interfacing on the wrong side of this, and then you'll fold it in half, iron it for a crease, then fold it in half again, and make your handles. All the instructions are in the PDF, so you'll need 2 handles. And then you'll also need a lining piece that is all one piece. Now, in order to cut this lining piece out, you're going to take your fabric on the fold of your fabric and then fold it the other way so that you have a fold on the bottom and on the side that says place on fold. So both these edges will be on the fold when you cut that, so it cuts out in one big long continuous piece. Just a little tidbit, and I don't know if this has ever happened to anybody else, but my interfacing, when I ordered a new bolt of flex foam to prep for my class kits for Sewcation Sin City, I ordered it from Walmart because it was the least expensive place to find the bolt of flex foam. And since I needed more interfacing, I just threw a bolt of interfacing on that order also. And I don't know if it got hot in the truck or hot in their warehouse or somewhere it got hot, because I live in southeastern Texas and it is like 900 degrees outside right now. But my fusible interfacing seems to have had the glue seep through to both sides of the interfacing, and now when I iron it on my ironing board, now my ironing board is ruined, because when I ironed pieces for my class kits and I ironed the fabric side up and the interfacing to the back of this fabric, I ironed it, then I like literally had to peel it off of my ironing board. So just be aware, if you order fusible interfacing in the heat of the summer, that could happen to you. So now I've got a whole bolt of interfacing that's not ruined because it's still working, but like it has messed up the top of my ironing board. So that's a story. You'll also need something to hold down your pattern. So I have these little chicken pattern weights. This is one of my little TikTok videos, and I have a little pattern on my website for these little chicken pattern weights. I just find these easier to use when I'm cutting out foam, because pins are really hard to stick down in there to pin your pattern pieces down. So if you put these little pattern weights on there and then cut around it, that works great. And then one other thing, when I was cutting out fabric, I keep finding these on the edges of my fabric. It's the selvage edge of some of the keepsake calico, and it says it designed exclusively for Joanne. So every time I find one, I've been cutting them off and saving them. I don't know what I'm going to do with them, but nostalgia, right? So, all right, let's get started. Okay, our first step is going to be to quilt your pieces to your flex foam or your quilt batting or whatever you're going to quilt it with. So this one does not have fusible on it, so I'm just going to pin it down. And I think what I'm going to do is just stitch down this center seam right here, and then I'm just going to stitch 1.5 inch lines down from like 1.5 inches. What am I trying to say? Lines spaced 1.5 inches apart, because that's as far out as my quilting guide goes. And I'm just going to do like horizontal lines on this, and then also on the top pieces. Mickey is going to sit on everything today. So I think on here I'm just going to start like 1.5 inches up and then do lines like that, because eventually you're going to put these two pieces together with right sides together, and then you're going to top stitch that seam. So I'm going to get all of the quilting done. It's kind of boring to watch. Very simple, just straight lines. You can quilt this in any way you want. Do keep in mind, though, that the more quilting lines that you put on there, it may shrink your pieces down a little tiny bit. So keep that in mind. I was just going to show you a little bit of sewing on the flex foam. It sews really easily. Excuse my machine. It has not sewn in almost a week, and so I probably need to oil it. So it's a little squeaky this morning until it gets woken up good. But your machine should go through it fairly well, even on a domestic machine. But I just love it because it kind of squishes it down and it makes a nice like quilted line on the flex foam. If your machine can adjust the scroll up a little bit, mine can adjust the presser foot up and down. If you're having problems, try adjusting that. Sometimes there's a screw just up here on the top that'll allow your presser foot to move up and down on some domestic machines. So just give it a little try. You could also use a walking foot on your machine if you're having problems feeding all of this through your machine. So keep that in mind. So anyway, I'm just going to line this line up on my little quilting guide, and I'm going to keep on sewing straight lines until I get all these pieces quilted. Okay, once you have all of your pieces quilted and trimmed up, sometimes I like to take my my foam and just leave it a big rectangle and then quilt my piece and then trim it so that it fits all of my pieces. Once you have that done, we're going to do the straps. So when you cut out the straps, they're going to be wide. See, my interfacing is super sticky. They're going to be wide, and you're going to end up folding it in half, iron it, put the ends into the center, or the edges into the center, iron that, and then fold it in half and give it a really good press with lots of steam. And you want to be sure that you fuse your interfacing onto these before you do all of that. So it'll give your strap some strength. Now we're going to do some top stitching. Now you can top stitch this any way you want, but the way I like to do it is I like to do it either 1/8 or 1/4 of an inch away from each edge, and then again 1/8 or 1/4 of an inch away from those stitches. So I think on this one I'm going to do I think I'm going to do it 1/4 inch away from each edge and then 1/4 inch from each one of those, so that I have 4 lines of stitching down both straps. So we're going to have a little help this time. We're going to have a little bit of help. Okay, so I'm going to move my quilting guide. These are great. So if your machine can handle a quilting guide, it is so good for getting straight seams. You can also use the little magnetic things, but the problem I have with this machine is these screws right here from my presser plate, they're rounded. So like I can't put the magnetic seam guide on here because it won't sit flat, even though my whole machine is metal. I'm not really sure why they did that. I could probably find different screws, but such is life. All right, I'm going to set my machine at a stitch length of 5 so this will go quicker, but you can do whichever stitch length you like. And I'm just going to hold the edge up against my seam guide there and stitch away. Okay, once you have one side done, flip it around, do the other side. And you can leave it like this with just 2 rows of stitching, but I like to go back and add a second row of stitching. So I'm going to line my seam guide up with that seam. That's going to put it in another 1/4 inch. And then I turn it around and I do the same thing on the other side. So I have 4 rows of stitching. So it should look like that once you're finished. And I'm going to do the other one and then we'll move on. Once you're done with both of those, set those aside and grab your bottom piece and one of your top pieces and some of your clips. Okay, now you're going to put the right sides together of both of these pieces and you're going to clip them together, and we're going to sew this seam at a 1/4 inch seam allowance, which is not a lot, so go slow and you can get this nice and straight. This is why I like using these clips on this foam, because it squishes them together. It's a little bit easier than sticking pins in it. All right, my machine came unthreaded, of course. All right, trying to rethread that around a camera. That was fun. Okay, now I'm going to turn my stitch length down to about a 4, 3.5, 4. And I'm just going to kind of squish this down with my finger as I go, and I'm going to go fairly slow, holding my edge up against my seam guide. This is where a walking foot would come in handy on a regular domestic machine. That way your layers aren't shifting as you're sewing. Okay, once you have that sewn, you're going to do the other side. Okay, now that we have both sides sewn on, you're going to take your seam allowance and you're going to fold it towards the bottom piece. You may have to roll your top up just a little bit to get this back under the machine. And we're going to top stitch on the bottom edge right here at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, but you're going to push your seam allowance down towards the bottom. So if it's too bulky to fit under your machine, you can always take some scissors and trim one side of the seam allowance, so that you're only dealing with one seam allowance layer of foam underneath there. So I just kind of feel it as I go and push it down towards the bottom side. And then once you've top stitched, it looks nice and neat, and it adds that extra quilt line in there on that side. So I'm going to repeat this on the other side. All right, so that's what your piece should look like. Should be all quilted, all your quilted pieces together, the 2 tops with the bottom. Okay, our next step is going to be to sew the side seams together. So what I like to do is take where these 2 seams are, and I'm going to match them up perfectly. And then I'm going to take a pin and I'm going to stick it in those seams so that they stay together. You'll probably need some fairly long pins for that. And then I'm going to clip the rest of the sides together, and we're going to sew these side seams together at a 1/4 of an inch. All right, now that I have that all clipped and pinned together, let's sew these side seams at a 1/4 of an inch. And just kind of smush it down as you go. Don't sew over your finger. Make sure all of your seam allowance that you top stitched is going down towards the bottom piece. And back stitch at the beginning and the end. All right, now that you're done with that, we're going to set this part aside. All right, the next thing you're going to need are your 2 pocket pieces. Actually, before you do your pocket pieces, you're going to take your straps and you're going to baste them to the right sides of your quilted pieces. So I like to take my straps, and the side that's was open is going to face towards the inside. So leave them hanging over about 1/2 of an inch, and you're going to baste these 4 spots down. And when you loop this around to the other side, make sure that this is not twisted. Now we're having to sew around a cat. We call him Nickel Pickle. Do y'all have nicknames for all of your animals? Because every one of our animals has a nickname for some reason. All right, so you're just going to baste those on, making sure that it's not twisted at 1/8 of an inch. You're going to leave this hanging over a little bit, about 1/2 of an inch. And then you're going to tuck your straps in there and set this whole thing aside. All right, now we're going to do our pockets. So you're going to have your 2 pocket pieces with the right sides together. You're going to sew around 3 sides of them and in just a little bit on the 4th side. Leave an opening so that you can turn it right sides out, about 3.5 inches in the center there. When you get to the corner, put your needle down, lift your presser foot up, pivot the corner. All right, and once you've got all 4 sides sewn, leaving an opening in the center, we're going to clip off our corners close to, but not through, your stitching lines. And then you're going to turn this right side out, and you're going to take this over to your iron and give it a really good press. And then you're also going to press the opening in 1/4 of an inch, matching up that seam allowance so that it lays nice and flat. Now, I do have a little tool here that I sell on my website. My husband 3D prints these point turners for me, and what they're good for is poking the corners out so they're nice and pointy. And if you do it very gently, then you will not stab through your fabric. So you can also use a chopstick for that, or a pencil that's not super sharp. I have done it with the ends of my scissors before. You just got to be really careful not to poke through your corners. All right, so take this to your ironing board, iron this really flat, fold these edges in 1/4 of an inch so that it makes it a nice straight line at the bottom. Once you have your pocket pressed, we're going to top stitch. This is the side with the opening, that's the bottom. We're going to top stitch across the top edge at 1/2 of an inch seam allowance. So I'm just going to flip my seam guide up and find the 1/2 inch mark on my sewing machine and follow that. And then trim your threads. That just gives it a little bit of a decorative edge at the top. You could add some lace there if you wanted to. You could do that in a decorative stitch. My machine only does straight stitch, but you could do this however you want. Now we're going to pin this to our lining. So grab your lining piece and you're going to open it up so it's just one layer. And on the right side of the lining piece, there's measurements in the pattern to tell you where to place this. There's also markings on the pattern piece too. So you're just going to line it up, make sure it's fairly straight. It is just inside your bag. It's on the lining. Nobody's going to be able to tell if it's not perfectly straight. So don't stress about the little things. And then we're going to pin this on. This is where we'll need some pins because it's in the center of the fabric. So pin this. I'm telling y'all, I got a package of these yellow ball pins because they're my favorite from Hobby Lobby a while back, and they are so dull. I tried to sharpen them on the little, the little tomato thing, the little strawberry on the tomatoes. It's downstairs. Otherwise, I'd show it to you. The tomato pin cushion. The little strawberry on there is a sharpener for your pins. And if you just stab it in there a bunch of times, it's supposed to sharpen your pins. But I've got so many of them that are dull. It's almost worth just going and buying a new package from somewhere else. I don't know where else. All right, we're going to sew your pocket on. We're going to back stitch really well at the beginning and the end, and we're going to go around all 3 sides. Make sure you back stitch really well. I like to go like a stitch or 2 over the edge of pockets and back stitch really well, because when you put stuff in your pockets, that's a stress point right there. So if you back stitch really well right there, it'll help your pocket from falling off. And I'm going to do this at 1/8 of an inch away from the edge. Once again, you're going to put your needle down and pivot at the corners. Yes, I sew over pins. And when you go across this bottom edge, it's going to close up the opening that we left to turn it right side out. All right. Once you have your pocket on, we're going to do the same thing that we did with the outside. We're going to sew the sides together. But on one edge, you need to make sure that you leave an opening, because that's how we're going to turn our whole bag right side out. So match up your side seams. And you can mark this with a pen or pins or however you want to do it. I'm just going to put a couple pins in there to remind me. You need to leave an opening about 4 inches long, 4 to 4.5 inches long along this side, so that you have plenty of room to pull that foam layer through. So we're going to sew down the side and back stitch really well here, back stitch, sew down, back stitch. The other side, you're just going to sew the entire side seam together, back stitching at the beginning and the end. So I'm just going to use clips on that edge to hold it together. All right. And you're going to use 1/4 inch seam allowance, of course, because it needs to match the outside of your bag. So skip over that opening. And make sure you back stitch really well, because it's going to stress right there trying to turn your whole bag right side out. I'm going to do the other side. And I've run out of bobbin thread. All right, sorry about that. I ran out of bobbin thread. So I finished sewing this long side seam. So we've got the side that's got the opening and the long side seam done. So now you're going to take your main piece and you're going to turn it right side out. Okay, once you have that turned right side out, you're going to insert it into your lining, and you're going to match up the top edges and pin it all the way around or clip. This may take a little finagling to get it in there. Okay, once you've got it kind of stuck in there, make sure your straps are going down in between the 2 layers, and you're going to match up your strap connector pieces here and your side seams, and you're going to clip or pin all the way around the top curvy edges. So I like to start kind of at the side seam and the strap and make sure they match up. And I like to what's called nest the seam allowances. So you'll push one seam allowance one way and the other seam allowance the other way when you match up those seams, and then that way they lay a little bit flatter when you sew around them. And just keep matching things up and clip or pin it all the way around. Also, when you're pinning these, remember when you basted these on, your straps should be sticking up about a 1/2 of an inch above all of the fabric. Okay, once you have that pinned all the way around and everything matched up and your little straps sticking out about a 1/2 of an inch above this, you're going to sew all the way around this top edge at 3/8 inch seam allowance. And when you are sewing up this curve next to the straps, you don't want to catch the edge of your strap in your stitching. So just sew around this curve, and when you're coming up here, you can feel where that strap is. You're going to sew fairly close to that strap. Put your needle down, pivot across here to the other edge of the strap, and then sew down around this curve. Don't catch your strap edges in your seam allowance, only across when you pivot and go across here. Just go slow, go around your curves. If you have a seam guide, set your seam guide so that you can keep your seam allowance straight. And yeah, that's it. Sewing around curves is not hard. Just go slow. If you have to sew 1 stitch a minute, 1 mile a minute, do that. Because it's better to have a nice even curve around here rather than bzz, 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 like that, and then like your curve is all jig-jaggy. So just go slow. You can do it. And take your time. I like to start at a side seam. When I get to the strap, I do like to back stitch kind of in the center of the strap a little bit. I just feel like that adds a little bit of strength to that strap. It's going to be basted on this seam gone over it, and then when we turn it and we top stitch it, this edge will be top stitched down too. So it is sewn in there like 3, maybe 4 times. So it's got a lot of strength, but I just like back stitching in the center of each one of my straps. And if for some reason you don't have 3/8 of an inch seam allowance on the other side of the strap, that's okay. Just go to the edge of the strap, put your needle down, and then pivot, and then you're going to kind of fade it back into a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Now sometimes this foam can be kind of hard to handle or in your way. Just manhandle it, get it down in there. It does flex. It is flex foam, so just move it out of your way, squish it down, fold it over, however you need to do it. Just make sure that you're focusing on where you're sewing. All right, we are in the home stretch, coming around the last curve. Back stitch back where that met. Okay, now you're going to take your scissors, and you'll need some fairly sharp scissors for this. You're going to leave this little tail on here from your strap, but you're going to clip these corners down pretty close to the corner stitching right there. Don't cut through your stitching though. And then you're going to do little tiny clips almost up to your stitching line all the way around the curves. So repeat that all the way around the top. Okay, once you've got all the little corners clipped off and your curves clipped, then you're going to take this and you're going to turn it through this hole. Now just go slow and careful because you don't want to rip this seam right here. But if you just kind of slide the bottom out first and then work it through, you can turn it all the way right side out. So turn this right side out, push your lining down on the inside, pull out your strap corners nice and crisp. You may need to use your point turner to poke those little corners out. Then take it to your ironing board and iron over the top edge and make it really, really flat. Okay, once you have it pressed, turn it wrong side out. And I like to stick my iron in there and press all this nice and flat and make sure everything's all nice and crisp. You may need to go through and trim some threads off, clean it up a little bit. I also forgot to tell you to take your lining and press the sides in, where the opening is, press the edges in 1/4 of an inch. Tuck your foam part away from that, and we're just going to sew that up with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Don't catch the foam outside in that seam though. Just kind of move it out of the way. So I can get all these little threads tucked in here. You can use clips if you need to. I'm just going to hold it. We're just going to sew that little opening shut. You can hand stitch this shut if you don't want this little seam allowance down the side. I've never ever, in the many years I've been making bags and stuff, I've never had anybody come back and say, oh, I don't like how that looks. So this is the easiest and quickest way to close up that opening. But if you want to hand stitch it and make it look invisible, you can do that too. Just trim off all your little threads. Okay, now there's different ways to finish off the corner, and I like to finish off the corners before I top stitch. My daughter has decided that she likes doing French seams on the corners way better, so since she doesn't use the flex foam, that works really well for her with just the 2 layers of quilting cotton. So she'll sew the corners with the right side out first and then flip it inside out and do the French seams. With the foam in that, it could get quite thick doing it that way in the corners, so we're just going to do it the way I wrote it in the pattern. So you're going to take these and you're going to fold it with the side seam matching up with the bottom crease to where it looks like a triangle on the corner. Now my lining for some reason has turned out a little tiny bit longer than my corners, so I'm going to trim that off, I guess, so that we can see what we're doing. So I'm just going to trim this to match up with my foam, which I didn't trim it straight, so it's not quite perfect, but you want your corners to all match up like that. So you want your side seam matching up with your bottom crease, and it's okay if your lining is just a tad bit bigger than your foam outside. That's because you quilted it and it kind of sucked it up a little bit and shrank. And you're going to sew this across at, I think I have 3/8 of an inch seam allowance in the pattern. So right across here at 3/8 of an inch away from there. If you want to add clips, you can to kind of keep it all together, but you want to make sure that you're getting both sides of your foam piece and both sides of your lining so that you don't miss any of it in the corners. So I'm just going to kind of add a couple clips there to hold it together. Like I said, my lining is extending a little bit further than my foam, and that's okay. Be sure you back stitch really well at the beginning and the end, because that's where your corner stress is going to be in your bag. So once you have that done, you're going to trim your seam allowance down to about, I don't know, a little more than 1/8 of an inch, because we're going to use some binding on this. Now you can use pre-made quilt binding, or you can make some binding out of your lining fabric so that it doesn't show, however you want to do it. I'm going to go cut a couple little pieces of this fabric so that it kind of blends in and doesn't show. I just cut 2 little pieces that are 2 inches by, I don't know, maybe about 6 inches. It just needs to be wider than your what am I trying to say? Wider than your corner. And then you're going to stitch this on right sides to either side, right along this stitching line. I'm going to do mine to the bottom side so you can see. So right sides touching. You want to leave a little edge, a little over each edge, because you're going to fold that in to make a finished seam. So I'm just going to stitch right over that stitching line again. And then I'm going to take this and I'm going to trim off a little bit off of this edge that's a little bit long to work with. And I'm going to fold this over, and I'm just going to kind of roll it around to where I have a folded edge. And I'm going to take these edges and fold them in before I do that. So I'm going to fold this in, kind of give it a crease. Fold this side in and give it a little bit of a crease. And then I'm just going to fold the bottom edge up to where it touches and then fold over. And then you're just going to top stitch this down over that same line again. You could add some clips in there if you want to. I just kind of hold it when I'm not working, trying to work around a camera. So I'm just going to fold that up in there. You don't want it like too wide. You just want it to cover that stitching line. And remember, this is going to be on the inside bottom corners of your bag. Nobody's going to look at it. So if it's not exactly perfect, it's okay. You just want the outside of your bag to look perfect, or as close to perfect as you can. And you can feel where that stitching line is in there. All right, so our corners are bound. I'm going to trim my little scraggly threads. I'm going to do the other side, and then we're going to top stitch. Once you have both your corners bound, you're going to top stitch this top edge 1/8 of an inch away from the edge. And I like to do mine with the right side out, but however you can fit it on your machine, you want to be top stitching from the front side. So I'm going to turn my bag right side out. Okay, my microphone went dead in the middle of this clip. So what I'm doing here is I am top stitching around the top of the bag with the right side facing up. And I'm just top stitching it at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. So I'm just running the edge along my 1/8 inch presser foot. You're going to go around the curve, and when you get up to the handle, just put your needle down and pivot like you did before. Go across, needle down, pivot, go back around the next curve. And you're just going to go all the way around. And when you're done top stitching, your bag is done. Okay, my mic went dead, so it sounds a little different. Lost audio halfway through that last clip. So anyway, we are done. It turned out fantastic. Now, my lining is a little bit loose in here. I do like doing the French seams on the corners better because it does like suck that lining down in there to where it's nice and tight. That's just a pet peeve of mine. Some people, it doesn't even bother them that their lining is loose. So anyway, your bag has a little pocket on the inside. It will stand up on its own. It's got nice, strong, reinforced straps. It's got boxed corners with a flat bottom. And needless to say, it's just too cute. Kind of like Mickle Pickle here. You can sew a little tie into the center front seams if you want to. And that way you have a bow to tie it shut. Because I know I don't really like taking an open tote bag like as a purse with my wallet in there. It gets, it makes me paranoid somebody's going to reach straight in or something's going to fall out. So I like to have my purses some way to shut them. So, but using it just as like a tote bag for like a library tote or a farmer's market tote or to travel with like my iPad and stuff on the airplane, this is perfect. But you could add a little tie at the top to tie it shut. You could add a snap in there or a button closure with a little loop. You could do a magnetic button. However you would want to close it, you could add that in there. Just figure out which step you need to do that. I know like with a magnetic closure, you'd need to put it into the lining before you sewed the lining to the outside fabric. That way, like the metal back of it is on the inside of the bag. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. I'm going to show you some of the examples of the other ones that I've made where I've quilted fabric together to make stripes. I did a fall one and a Christmas one, and they are fantastic. I'm going to go grab those out of my closet and I'll show you those too. All right, now that we're done with this one, I went and got my other ones so that you can see them up close. So this is the one we made in the tutorial. So it's got one color at the top, one color at the bottom, and then I did the straps the same color as the lining. But I also made these fabulous ones. This is the first one I ever did. And I took strips of fall fabric and I sewed them together in vertical lines, like 2-inch strips in vertical lines, and made a piece of fabric big enough to cut my pattern pieces out of. And then I just quilted it again onto the flex foam. So this is the first one I made. I didn't put a pocket in this one, but I used this in the fall to carry around with me. And then I did this one out of Christmas fabric. So it's so fun. The inside is like Santa's cookies and all of that. So yeah, that one is so much fun too. So you can just have a blast mixing and matching all of your patterns and fabrics and whatnot. You could even make it all solid color, however you want to do it. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, give it a thumbs up, leave a comment, all the YouTubey things. Be sure you subscribe for all of our newest tutorials. And you can find all the patterns at buythebaybagco.com. All of my patterns are either free or $5 because I want everybody to be able to afford to try sewing at some point. And if for some reason you stumbled across this video and you've watched it all the way to this point and don't have a clue how to sew or even thread your machine, I do offer an online sewing course called Quick Stitch Academy, where I sit down with you as if I'm in the sewing room with you, walking you through every step of the way, and all the way through threading your machine, starting out on projects, to finishing a couple of nice finished projects for you so that you learn some of these techniques. So check that out at quickstitchacademy.com if you're interested, and be sure to do all the YouTubey things on here. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial, and I will see you in the next one.